What if the next breakthrough medical device that saves your life isn't developed by a major corporation, but by a startup halfway across the world? And what if the key to their success isn't funding or luck, but having the right guidance at the right time? Welcome to Industry Ignited, the podcast where we explore how industrial and life science leaders are transforming innovation into impact. I'm your host, Dr. Leeanne Aguilar, and today I'm joined by Richard Reeves-Bird, president of Reeves Consult. With more than 25 years in the medical device industry, Reeves has mastered the art of turning brilliant scientific ideas into thriving businesses. Reeves, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Leanne. Thank you very much. I'm looking forward to it.
Likewise. Now, you started your career as a physicist and somehow found your way into clinical affairs and executive leadership in the medical device industry. Looking back, what key moments or experiences shaped that transition?
Well, it was really one. This is one of those funny stories, just kind of fumbling into the right thing at the right time. So I was working for a company at the time. It was called LORAD. It's now Hologic, which most people have heard of. The CEO, he somehow saw something in me that I probably didn't see it myself. I was just out of grad school. I was really young, and he said this guy could work with all of these clinicians and head our clinical affairs. And he decided that's what he wanted me to do. And so if the CEO asks you to do something, you go, yes, that's what I'm going to do. And I did it, and I thoroughly enjoyed it. I love the interface with the clinicians. These guys they're just so smart, and I was learning something different from what my training was, being a physicist. But I think if you're in the science, you've got this inquisitive mindset, and so I always wanted to learn and grow. And I just became very passionate about the clinical trial side and answering these important clinical questions. To me, it was more interesting than the technical physics side. So that's how that happened.
Oh, that's so interesting. And yeah, it is interesting how other people can sometimes see things that we don't see in ourselves. And that can lead to, like in your case, career transitions. But I guess they have the more experience and they've worked with people who have, similar characteristics perhaps. And he just identified, that potential, interest and potential, I guess, match that came about with that. So interesting. Now, you've worked with early stage innovators for decades. What inspired you to focus your career on helping startups rather than leading one single company?
Well, so I led some individual companies, and I think my passion is the early stage companies, and it's because oftentimes that's where the innovation happens. It's sometimes big companies have innovation, but these early stage companies, that's all they have. They're focused on innovation. And so my goal was, how can we accelerate their process? And so I had been a CEO for early stage companies, and one of the big problems is funding. An executive that is seasoned and has experience, they're kind of expensive, and these early stage companies oftentimes can't afford it. So it was in 2014 I got the idea that it could be done on a fractional basis, and I could work with multiple early stage companies, provide them with the expertise that they need. And very honestly, at those early stages, they didn't need a full-time person. So it was a good match. And this was before most places were doing, fractional type executive work.
Right. Yeah, that's super interesting. So you got into the business of the fractional leadership before it became a buzzword, like you mentioned. And what challenges did you face then in that space, convincing others it could work?
Well, it was new, just like innovation. When you come out with something new that nobody has seen before, you do have to show them, what's the value? How can we provide more value to you than you could get otherwise? And in this case, I think it was pretty straightforward, because if you're paying a fraction of what somebody costs, but you can get all of what you really need out of them, that's a win for the company.
Right. Yeah. So you're cutting out the administrative costs or, some of the other downtime that they might not be productive. And you're just focusing on that or paying for that part of the time that you're really getting the value from them. Now, what personal or professional values have guided you through your career as both a scientist and a business leader?
Well, the science part was a little too short to answer that question. I transitioned really quickly into the executive management side. It's a hard question to answer through the process, but I think that whenever I was working for a company, when I was an employee, you always try to think of how you can do the job the best that you possibly can. And I think the other part was always having a growth mindset and trying to see if I learn more, then I can provide more value. And so it was kind of those two things. And then when you carry that to, say, a fractional role like we're doing now, you maintain those values. And so I always think of myself and anybody on my team, our kind of our mantra is we are an extension of that company, and our job is to function on behalf of that company
Right.
and do the best that we can so that that company can be successful. And those companies' successes just lead to more business for us.
Yeah, no, I like that. Yeah, that's a good mantra philosophy. You're working as a part of a team internally, but you're externally here and you're guiding that effort. And so your commitment to that company is a win-win for everyone involved.
Right, exactly.
So much of your work today involves helping international companies, especially European startups, enter the US market. What are the biggest challenges these innovators face when trying to scale in this space?
There are a bunch of ones. I think one of them is most of them really don't understand the economics around entering the U.S. market. I don't mean that so much from a business standpoint, but from a healthcare standpoint. So they don't understand our reimbursement system, CPT codes, how are we going to get paid, and the fact that in our country, the economics is sort of everything. If there's not a financial reason to buy a product, it's unlikely to be successful. And this is kind of the hard truth, but I tell my clients, if you can't follow the money in the U.S. healthcare system, you don't have a business on your hand. You have a hobby. And unfortunately, I hate to say this, but the reality is I have seen products that had good efficacy for patients, but for financial reasons, they were not successful and not able to scale. And so that's a very important component for people from overseas coming to the US. Another aspect that I think is often overlooked when you're overseas and you're trying to navigate the US market, there's all kinds of mechanics that you have to do. There's insurance, there's legal documents, there's registrations, there's payroll, there's all this kind of stuff that's foreign. And if you are overseas and you're trying to go, okay, who's the attorney I can work with? Who's the insurance broker I can work with? How do I get payroll done? How do I comply with this state law? That's tough. But being in the US and having done this for so many years, we pull all of that together. I don't call that the core of our business, but I look at it as we want to provide a complete package. So
Yeah.
everything from regulatory, reimbursement, the legal, the insurance, we want to be able to provide all of that to our clients so that it's easy for them to launch in the US.
Yeah, so you just make it streamlined, simple, understandable. And I have a question about the regulatory process, but before we get into that, so it's like you mentioned that there are sometimes products that you've seen that have great efficacy and potential on, as far as providing health benefits to a client, but it's not always financially beneficial. Like there's not a great business model around it. Are you able to identify that from the onset and either strategically pivot like with a new business model or what do you do in those situations?
It's a great question. And the answer is today, yes, but I've made some mistakes and I've learned from those mistakes. So one of the most important things that we do that is often overlooked by other companies coming to the U.S. We see this mistake happen all the time. The company will and these would not be companies that engaged in us, but they'll just go through the regulatory process and they'll think, okay, we got through the regulatory process. Now we go and sell. But they never did any customer discovery. They never really looked at who's the market, who's going to want this, who isn't going to want this, who's going to pay for it, why are they going to pay for it. And so we go through a really extensive customer discovery process before we launch. And that is to do exactly what you said. I mean, and sometimes we've seen products that we felt like we're not going to make it for financial reasons. We've had a number that came to us and under their current value proposition would not make it, but we were able to pivot and get them to a value proposition that would have success.
So interesting. Yeah, it's fascinating that they wouldn't have considered, like their target demographic and the value proposition to begin with. I guess in the world of marketing, that's something that we just start with, right? We start with the overall objectives and that value proposition and target market before we really get further into the communication process. So that's interesting.
I'll give you an example of that. This was a European company, and they had all over their website prevention, 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 prevention. And prevention doesn't have reimbursement in the US. So they were going to have a very difficult time. However, their product also, in order to prevent, it was detecting events early. Early detection can be reimbursed. We didn't change the product at all. We changed all of the marketing. We changed what we saw as the indication for use, and it changed the finances for that company.
Wow. No, and that makes complete sense, right? Yeah, changing that, the focus and the messaging to something that is profitable or has that
Has reimbursement.
the reimbursement.
Yeah,
Thank you, thank you.
yeah.
Now, the U.S. regulatory process can be complicated, like you said, it's complex, but you've described it as often faster and more predictable than Europe's current MDR system. What are some key advantages of launching in the U.S. first?
Well, there's two. One, as you said, it's faster. So a 510K with the FDA, which is probably the majority of what we do. We do a lot of de novo, but a 510K has a review timeline of 90 days by the FDA. And the de novo is 120. And every now and then we get a PMA, and that's 180 days. Conversely, the MDR, they changed the regulations and it became much more complex. So the notifying bodies that do the MDR in the EU, a lot of them dropped out because it got too complex. So then the big ones are left, but now they have more work per application, as well as now they're getting more applications because a bunch of the notified bodies decided they're not going to do it. It's too complicated. And the result is we were hearing from a lot of the Europeans that they just said, we're not even going to bother trying to get into Europe because we sent a notified body our application and they said, we'll be able to look at it in about 18 months. We'll start your process. That'll put an early stage company out of business. So that's one, but the other really kind of, the US is about 50% of the world healthcare market. So if you can make it in the US, then you're going to get bought by another company who
Okay.
already has distribution and regulatory and everything else in all of the other countries that they're in. And that's the goal for most of these early stage companies. They want to be acquired by another larger entity.
Right. Yeah, I was going to say that's probably the goal for most. And on the flip side, the larger companies are looking for the smaller companies who take that risk and provide the innovation and go through the trials to.
Exactly. That's exactly right. I mean, they want to have something that's ready-made, that has traction, that they really don't have to figure all of that stuff out. And then they're happy. They've got plenty of money. They're happy to pay top dollar for it.
Yeah. Now, many companies you work with are led by brilliant scientists who may not have strong business backgrounds. What are some common mistakes you see in early stage innovators when they bring their products to market? I mean, you mentioned like the marketing aspect, the messaging, but what are other things?
Yeah, so one, the economics. They oftentimes don't look at the economics. They only look at, this is a problem and here's a healthcare benefit. That's great, but you do have to look at the economics. I would say there's two other aspects. Customer discovery is one. These innovators often think that they have all the answers in their own little space, and they don't branch out and start asking others and asking other stakeholders. So let's say it's a surgeon. What he's doing is also going to affect nursing and maybe anesthesiology and, some other aspects. And so you have to go out there and do that customer discovery and learn how it's going to affect the entire system. And when I say system, then there's the next component, and that's workflow. So anytime you bring in, I'll call it disruptive, innovative technology, you're going to change workflow. And that's not to be taken lightly in the healthcare system. Most of the time they've been doing things a certain way for a long period of time, and change is hard.
Hmm.
So you have to make sure that there's enough value that people go, yeah, we want to change our workflow and do it this way. This way's better.
Yeah, that makes sense. Right. Change is difficult and it can make a huge difference. And so, how do you go about if you identify those roadblocks? How do you work with a CEO or startup to change their mindset?
Well, it's the old adage, they have to want to change. I have had, um, scientists or physicians come to me with an innovative idea, and we talk about this, and they go, "No, I don't need to do that. I don't need to do customer discovery. This is great. Everybody's going to love it. We're going to just take it right to market." And I usually decline to work with those people,
Ah,
because
yeah,
that's not the formula for success, and we really want to work for success.
yeah. Okay, well, that makes sense. Yeah, just to not take on that business because it's going to be, butting heads and there's going to be a lot of resistance and you're not going to be able to accomplish what you need to if they're not on board and willing to do what it takes and using your methodology that's been proven.
Yeah.
Now, you've emphasized that Reeves Consult isn't an advisory firm. Rather, it's a hands on extension of a client's team. What does that look like in practice, and why does that approach make such a difference?
Yeah. So, let's take the European client example. So they're overseas. How beneficial would it be if I were to say, well, you need to go do this and you need to go do that? But then they still have to do all the work. Okay. So that to me, I just don't think that adds a lot of value. And so what we do is we discuss with them the steps that need to be taken, but then we take those steps. And so as an example, I'll go out with a device and train a clinician on how to use it and get feedback directly. We'll build medical advisory boards and hold medical advisory meetings, sometimes in person, sometimes virtual. We write the FDA application and submit it on their behalf. So, yeah, we're very, very hands-on, and to me, that's the only way to do it. It's the only way to really provide that level of value.
Why?
Why?
Yeah.
Why do we do it?
Yeah, why is it the only way to provide that level of value?
Well, otherwise they have to do it, right? So if we're not actually executing on the plans that we put forth, they're going to have to get somebody to execute that. And
Uh-huh.
really all they're getting out of us is advice. I mean, we have the strategy, but then we implement the strategy. We don't just talk about the strategy.
Yeah. I love that. And then I'm sure with all of your experience, you have all the tools and the resources and you can be a lot more efficient about implementing it as well.
We've done it a bunch of times. So like anything, if you do it a lot, you get good at it, you get
Right.
efficient.
And also they're avoiding that learning curve because with any new process or any new, something that you haven't done before, there's always a learning curve. And so they can
Yeah,
cut
that's a
that
really
down.
good point. That's a really good point. I think of things that to me are really simple and straightforward, like building a medical advisory board and doing customer discovery.
Hmm.
And if you've never done it before, though, those tasks can be kind of daunting.
Absolutely. It's intimidating. Where do you even start? And what makes a good advisory board? What are the right? So I think there's a lot of things that you bring to the table that they wouldn't know where to start with to move
Yeah,
forward with.
and I'll just mention this very quickly, but things like a pre-sub meeting with the FDA.
Hmm.
So, putting together like a clinical protocol, what your endpoints are, going to the FDA, getting buy-in from them before you begin your process and your application. So, we do those on a regular basis. But I think if you hadn't done one, the first one that I did was a little intimidating to me.
Right.
But now I've done a whole bunch of them and it's like second nature.
Yeah. Well, and I'm guessing since you have done so many at this point that you have relationships. So if you do run into something that you know where to go, who to ask, and you can get help and have those resources as well to
Yeah,
guide the process.
absolutely.
Yeah. Now, you've worked on some incredibly innovative technologies, from holographic imaging for surgical planning to bone regeneration therapies. Which projects have most inspired you and why?
So this is really an interesting question. And I had to think about it for a little while. but it is less about the technology than it is about the team. And I will have to say that the people, they inspire me. And so it's because the technology evolves as you go through a lot of these processes, and it evolves with a team of people. And that's what's exciting, is seeing, okay, we had this medical advisory board meeting. They said these three things are good, but these two things are lacking and need to be changed. And we get together as a team and we figure out, okay, how are we going to meet the needs of our customers? And that's really what's exciting, is the people and how
The
you
people.
solve the problems.
Okay. Well, then what are some of the most inspiring qualities or traits in people that you've seen that have inspired you?
Well, just about all of them are, dedicated. I mean, they really want to push the limits of what can be done. And the really good ones, the really fun ones to work with are the ones that know they don't know everything. And they're kind of like a sponge and they just keep absorbing things. I always think this is where I really have fun with the European clients, because they're the ones that are seeking to understand how their customer in the US thinks and how they can best meet those needs. And those are the qualities that are really passionate, the ones that want to absorb all the information and then deliver the best quality that they possibly can.
Okay, so people who are just insatiably curious and then want to take that and make something great out of it. And yeah, that's interesting that you see a mindset, I guess, difference between European and US, clientele as well.
Well, the US, the US people in the US already have a pretty good understanding of the healthcare environment.
Hmm.
So they have less of a gap there. So it's the overseas that are learning the US healthcare environment and how the people in the provider side of the world think. So that's why it's a little bit different.
Yeah, that makes sense. Now, you mentioned a diagnostic that can determine chemotherapy effectiveness for triple negative breast cancer patients, an incredible leap forward. How do projects like that change your perspective on the impact of innovation?
Well, something like that has an impact on people's lives. The triple negative breast cancer is a very aggressive, fast growing disease. And one of the problems is when prior to surgery, they're going to receive chemotherapy, hopefully stunt the growth and the aggression of the triple negative breast cancer. The problem is you don't know if the chemotherapy is working. And about 30 to 40% of the time, it may not be. The patient may not be responsive. So an innovation that allows you to do the diagnostic alongside with the chemotherapy allows the surgical oncologist to optimize that chemotherapy treatment in the event that the patient's not responsive. And that's
Hmm.
going to totally change that patient's outcome. That
Yeah,
patient is, because if the chemotherapy doesn't work and you go to surgery, their outcome's probably not very good. But if you can change the chemotherapy to something that they are responsive to in advance of the surgery, then their outcome should be as good as anyone else's.
right. Yeah, no, that is huge and
Yes.
exciting technology. What role do collaboration and mentorship play in accelerating breakthroughs across the medical device industry?
I think it's a big role, because depending on the discipline you're in, if you can find the right mentor that knows that space, that can help navigate the water. I would be amiss if I said I was an expert in every space in the medical device world. There's too many. So finding the right person, or sometimes people, that know that space intimately, that can give you more information. Again, it's kind of about a growth mindset. So mentors always play a key role in my life today. By the same token, I'm also a mentor for multiple early stage incubators. So I feel that that's important to give back to the
Right.
communities that have been very helpful to me.
Yeah. Yeah, that's so true. I mean, it does come down to mindset and having input from those who have been there before and can, give a different perspective, I think is really helpful. And then, like you said, paying it forward to generations who are coming up behind and who don't have the knowledge and information that you might have is just moves everything forward. Now,
Yes.
As someone who works with scientists, engineers, and physicians worldwide, how do you balance technical precision with entrepreneurial agility?
Oh, that's a tough one. the I've you can engineer forever to make the perfect technical thing. You'll never get it to market. And that happens a lot of times. We do see a lot of, kind of scientist engineers. Well, it's not perfect yet. It's not perfect yet. And they keep wanting to perfect it. And it's like, you know what? You have to have the MVP, minimum viable product.
Hmm.
Okay. It's not perfect, but we need to get it out there. We need to get it in use. We need to get real world clinical feedback and determine where it's lacking and focus on that. And it can evolve. We can have version 2, version 3. We can continue to make it better. We oftentimes, I think this also goes to a technique that we use a lot when you're going into the FDA. The most important thing is to determine what is your indication for use. And so sometimes, in fact, oftentimes, we will narrow that indication for use to make it easier to get that product through the regulatory process. And then
Yeah.
after we get it through the regulatory process, then we may do some additional clinical trials or things to expand that indication for use to what we really would like it to be.
Oh, okay. Oh, that makes sense.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. But yeah, just getting it out there and learning it because when it's out there, yeah, then you have the freedom to do more testing and start collecting that data.
The one that you brought up earlier is a perfect example, the triple negative breast cancer.
Hmm.
Okay, so that can be used for other areas, looking at pre-biopsy to have a higher degree of specificity before you take a patient to biopsy, to do post-surgical surveillance, because post-surgical surveillance now for breast cancer patients can be very expensive. It often means an MRI, and this IVD is much less expensive and
Hmm.
could determine if something is potentially recurring. And then there are other cancers it can be used for. So we're obviously we're not going to take it to market and say, hey, this IVD can do all of this stuff. We're gonna bite off the triple negative breast cancer, monitoring the chemotherapy treatment before surgery,
Hmm.
and then we're going to go back and we're going to expand its use. We're going to do additional clinical trials. We're going to do additional submissions with the FDA, and we're going to expand there.
Right. Well, yeah, because then you have some cash flow, coming in too, so you can support further innovation, right?
Exactly. The cash flow is a big help, and that obviously that changes kind of the investor landscape. Once they see you're starting to get traction in one area, they know that you have a formula to get traction in other areas.
That makes sense. So, Reeves, the fractional executive model you pioneered is now becoming mainstream. How do you see this model evolving in the next 5 to 10 years, especially in life sciences?
That's a good question. One thing that I've seen, the predominant fractional model have been individuals that do one thing. Like you'll get a fractional regulatory, a fractional clinical, fractional executive, fractional. There's lots of fractional sales executives out there right now. And I think what may evolve may be what we're doing, which is we've pulled all that together. So I have a director of regulatory. I have an EVP of clinical affairs that used to run a CRO. She's a PharmD. I have a vice president of commercialization. So I have all of these people on staff so that we can provide really a full package to our
Mm,
clients. I think we might see other firms do the same model that we've done
uh-huh.
over time.
Yeah. No, yeah, I like that. So it's not just one fractional expert, but people in all different areas that can come in. So it's a whole team that you're providing to move people forward.
Right. And you don't need all of those people all of the time.
Hmm.
Different disciplines are happening at different times. And the beauty of that is you don't have to go out and hire somebody and then, okay, I hired this person to do these clinical trials. Well, the clinical trials are over. What do I do with this person?
Right.
Well, with us, that's natural. That's part of the process. You only pay for that person during the time that you need them.
Yeah. Well, and it also makes sense because if you're hiring a team who are already familiar with working together and they already are efficient and know each other's strengths and can understand how to work together, I think that's powerful too. That moves things forward. Like you're not having to hire new people who don't know anything about each other and have to figure out how to work together.
Exactly. We very much kind of play off each other for different aspects. So, I'm oftentimes spending some time in regulatory, even though
Hmm.
there's someone else that's really the lead. Same thing with clinical affairs, same thing with commercialization. So good overlap with a team like ours.
Right. Yeah. And so there's not that, again, that big learning curve because you understand who knows which part of the process and there's not as much guessing. There's more synergy already established.
Yeah, whose strengths can complement other people's,
Hmm. Huh.
so how we can be the most efficient and, accomplish our goals collectively.
Yeah. Now you've said that your goal is to graduate clients to help them become self sustaining. What does a successful graduation look like for you?
So we want to gain traction for our clients in sales. That's where I say they graduate. So I would say it depends on the product or what's being sold, but we want to have at least 10, 15, maybe 20 successful sales before they're ready to go on to some type of scalable distribution, contract sales organization, something like that. And I think that might be another differentiator on what we do because to me, until you know and understand the sales process, you're going to have champions that are going to want the device. You're also going to have some people that may not want the device. You're also going to have the financial component. And then there's the IT component. Okay. So if you're doing anything that, has electronic records, you've got that component as well. And so how long is the sales cycle? And how do you get it through to actually getting that purchase order?
Yeah.
And I feel like if we can't answer that question before we graduate them, we haven't done our job.
Yeah. No, I think that, I mean, that's pretty brilliant. I love that, that you're actually training them on the sales aspect too, that you're making sure that they're educated and equipped to be successful once finish your relationship with them.
We talked about like some of the mistakes that get made. This is one I didn't mention, but it's important. We often see, particularly overseas companies, that will get FDA clearance and they'll go, okay, let's say it's an orthopedic device. We found a great orthopedic distributor. They're going to sell so much of this. And they sign on this orthopedic distributor and they go, this is going to be great. And they don't sell anything. A year goes by and they sold nothing.
Wow.
And that's because they didn't go through that process on their own and learn what does it take to sell. And then they need to have somebody that's going to support that distributor and help drive those sales. Those
Right.
sales aren't going to magically happen because just like, people don't easily change habits. The distributor's been selling these other things and they know how to
Hmm.
sell these other things. And it takes effort to start selling something new, particularly if it's innovative
Right.
and it's not something that people have been buying before. So that takes more effort and you have to have somebody to help drive that if you're dealing with distributor or contract sales organizations.
Yeah, that is so true. I mean, it's a sales is a whole nother skill set. I mean, for one, the language, the techniques, learning how to face objections, overcome objections, like you said. And a big part of that is the education process. And right, so if they're not equipped, then they're going to struggle. And like you mentioned, if they don't know how to educate their distributors, then they're stuck and they'll just go back to selling what's the easiest, what they know already.
Right,
Like you
exactly.
said, don't want to change. Now, finally, Reeves, what advice would you give to early stage CEOs or innovators who are struggling to find traction or funding for their breakthrough ideas?
Well, that's a very complicated question. I mean, funding changes depending on the stage of the company.
Mhm.
So if you're it really all depends. I mean, so if you have a proof of concept, that's different than you've completed a successful clinical trial, which is different than you've got clearance from regulatory, which is also different from you've got your first 5 sales. So there are different inflection points where you're raising capital. And I think that's important, is to understand what those milestones are and when you can have an increase in valuation for your next round of finance. So I said that would be the big challenge in terms of that. I think the traction is usually, I mean, it depends on what you mean by traction. If it's sales, that's kind of towards the tail end of what we do. And I think that it goes back to, you have to have somebody to drive those sales, and you have to know that sales process, the company itself. You can't just give it to distribution or contract sales and expect that your product's going to go and sell itself.
Right, like we were talking about a little bit ago. Exactly.
Hmm.
Yeah. And I know I said finally, but one more question. Looking ahead, what excites you most about the future of medical innovation, and what keeps you motivated to keep leading in this space?
Well, there's a couple of things. One is where I'm located. I'm located in Winston-Salem, North Carolina, and Wake Forest School of Medicine is here,
Hmm.
and a hub for regenerative medicine is here. So it's the top hub for regenerative medicine in the country, and one of the top, if not the top, in the world. And the things that they're doing there, honestly, it's almost like reading a science fiction book. I mean, it's just crazy how they are literally growing tissue that can then be put into the body, or they're putting I'll call it a scaffold into the body, where then the body regenerates its own tissue in a manner that we never could do before. So like that one company I was talking about, the name of the company is Biomindex, and it's a company that has a bone scaffold. So you can do a spinal fusion with this. You put it in between, just like a normal spinal fusion, except you're not bolting anything down. You put this in there, and then the bone tissue grows itself between, say, two vertebrae. Um,
Amazing.
it is. It's not on the market yet. They
Uh-huh.
have to gain market clearance, but they are using it veterinary, and it works quite well. I say regenerative medicine is a major area. Another area are the IVDs. And so I talked about the one that I was working with. That's Satya Diagnostics. And we're seeing kind of an explosion in the IVD market right now. And then the third area, which I'm sure a lot of people have heard about, is, of course, AI on big data.
Yeah.
And the beauty of AI on big data is we're going to get more and more into personalized medicine. We're going to know what treatments, what therapies will work based on an AI algorithm that's looked at large data sets.
Reeves, thank you for sharing your incredible insights and for the work you're doing to help life science innovators bring their breakthroughs to life. It's inspiring to see how your leadership bridges the gap between science, business, and patient impact. For listeners who want to learn more, how can they reach you?
So probably the best way is through our website, which is reevesconsult.com, or they can, of course, email me, reeves@reevesconsult.com.
All right. Well, thank you again. It's a fascinating conversation. And to our audience, if you enjoyed today's episode, be sure to subscribe and tune in next time to Industry Ignited. And until next time, stay bold, stay curious, and keep igniting industry.